The Codex Astartes is an interesting thing, having been a source of division amongst the Space Marines pretty much since day one. From the Codex crisis involving author Robert Guilliman and critic Rogel Dawn, all the way through history to the various deviations we see today, the document that divided the Legiones Astartes was never truly accepted by all. However, even as it is reworked by the returned Lord Commander with a view to replacement by the Codex Imperialis, the Codex Astartes is still venerated and followed incredibly strictly by many chapters. Some, like the Ultramarines, even venerate it as nothing short of Holy Scripture, and it is one of these chapters like them that we shall discuss today. This chapter, like many, has a shrouded history, and though its members look down on those who deviate from the Codex or are otherwise impure compared to them, they have served loyally for their entire existence. However, despite their rigidness, they can still innovate where possible, and their most recent history has led to a rather interesting leadership situation. Officially led by Lord High Commander Karab Kuln and hailing from a world and legion unknown, they are known simply as the Red Scorpions. This is Tactica Imperialis, and welcome to 40k Stories. The chapter of the Red Scorpions has been around for a not insignificant amount of time. Unfortunately, we lack an exact date for their founding, even to the nearest millennium, but records do state that they've been around for at least 5,000 years as of M41. This means that the chapter was likely founded in M35, if not before, but sadly, narrowing it down further is more than a little bit difficult. The same must unfortunately be said for their primogenitor and thus their Primarch, whose identity is a total mystery, though if one were to hazard a guess, the Ultramarines and Guilliman are among the best candidates. The reason for this is threefold: the veneration of the Codex, their flexibility in combat, and the purity of their gene seed, which is consistently amongst the purest. The Ultramarines were always regarded as having some of the most stable gene seed alongside the Dark Angels and Imperial Fists. However, the former First Legion has largely remained connected despite its division into chapters, and so it is unlikely the Red Scorpions are part of the Unforgiven. The Sons of Dawn are an outside bet for a primogenitor, I suppose, but given the other factors in play, I find it hard to look past the returned Lord Commander as the likely gene father of the Red Scorpions, even if it's not been acknowledged. Plus, statistics favour me because the Ultramarines did found the most chapters back in the day. In any event, the Red Scorpions have served with total fidelity for the 5,000 or more years since their supposed inception. They do not have the same disturbing reputation as some of the other chapters we've looked at recently. Certainly if you asked your average Imperial or Astartes who they'd rather work with, the Red Scorpions would rank above the Minotaurs or the Carcharodon and Astra at any rate. However, that is not to say the Red Scorpions are the ideal allies, especially for non-Space Marines or any who show even the slightest flaw, mutation, or deviance. As I mentioned earlier, the gene seed of the Red Scorpions is consistently extremely pure. Only a small defect in the Betchers clan, genuinely nothing major compared to many other chapters. Unfortunately, this purity has somewhat gone to their head, making them look down on those they believe to be less pure or devoted than themselves. This means that they maintain a healthy distrust of pretty much everyone, having become extremely isolationist in their quest to maintain their purity. Extremely mutated chapters such as the Space Wolves or the Black Dragons are likely tolerated at absolute best. Perhaps the Scorpions would even refuse to work with them, though I don't think that situation has exactly come up, so maybe not. However, one doesn't have to be a mutant to be a deviant in the eyes of the Red Scorpions. As we mentioned in the introduction to this log, the Red Scorpions are one of the chapters who regard the Codex Astartes as nothing short of Holy Scripture that they presumably follow to the letter, with a couple of inventions or maybe some strategic variations, but very minor. This means that those chapters who do not follow the tenets of Guilliman's tome are treated with the same scorn as those who show mutation, and it is known that the Red Scorpions will not fraternize with these deviants in an attempt to maintain their own purity. How archaically misguided they are. Those non-Space Marine forces who serve under or alongside the Red Scorpions are treated with perhaps even more disdain. Every other arm of the Imperial war machine cannot be trusted, to the point that in one case the chapter developed an entirely new variant of Land Raider in the middle of a war just because they didn't trust the Astra Militarum and feared being tainted by their presence. As for our humans, well, I suspect that given the option, a Red Scorpion will put a bolt round through their heads, then fight alongside or work with them. That's not of the massively uncommon mindset for many Imperials, I suspect, but it's absolutely not helpful in the prosecution of a military campaign. This distrust does mean that, unlike perhaps others, the chapter will never put its faith in others to see a job done, and so will likely always make sure it can do said job itself. As a result, their combined arms approach is incredibly flexible, meaning that, though it is unconfirmed, their battle doctrines are likely also very adaptable in the field to allow any mission to be accomplished. As for their typical deployments, whilst they are of course subject to requests for aid and proximity and such, observers have noted the zeal and rush the Red Scorpions have in suppressing rebellion on Imperial worlds. They are, as you might expect given their whole insular purity ethos, something of a traditionalist group. It is also stated that they are extremely authoritarian in their own command structure, so suppressing those who rise up against the Imperium would of course be something extremely high on their own agenda. Of course, this doesn't take anything away from the chapter against other foes. Their abhorrence for mutation and rebellion will absolutely extend to the servants of chaos, and their xenophobic streak can probably rival pretty much anyone else. Though they do revere the Codex Astartes and are of course devoted to the Emperor since they have no known Primarch, I would be curious to see if the Red Scorpions believe in the Imperial cult and thus worship the Emperor as a god. Given it won't have been laid out in the Codex that was written before the rise of the Ecclesiarchy, I would suspect that they don't, even if they are totally loyal to the Lord of Mankind. We don't have much of an idea as to their employment and situation in the modern era right now, besides their presence in the Indomitus Crusade, but I'd be very intrigued to see what their reaction is or was to the Primaris Space Marines. Obviously, these new Astartes are part of Guilliman's new army and will likely be integrated into the updated Codex, but the extremely insular, distrusting chapter might well have needed some winning around to the idea, since of course it's a deviation from what a Space Marine has always been up to this point, and it wasn't the way the Emperor designed it. I don't know, I can just see them having some issues with it. The structure of the Red Scorpions is, surprising absolutely nobody given their fanatical adherence to the Codex, pretty much as typical as it gets for an Astartes chapter. However, there are a couple of little quirks that feed into both the ethos and recruitment style of the chapter. Perhaps the most visible of these variations is the enlarged apothecarian and the higher importance of apothecaries in general within the Red Scorpions. The Master of the Apothecarian is the de facto second in command of the entire chapter, behind of course the Chapter Master, known as the Lord High Commander in this case, and there are many more apothecaries than usual who will often be assigned to individual squads. Given the importance of their purity and that of their gene seed, in fact it is their core tenet and belief, perhaps the fact that there are more apothecaries who can thus ensure the swift recovery of untainted seed from fallen brothers is no surprise at all. However, if the Apothecarian is enlarged, then to remain Codex compliant, i.e. at 1,000 members, there must logically be a cut to numbers elsewhere, and it seems as though there is one, though perhaps by accident and in an unlikely place. Rather than slightly shrinking their Librarius, Armory, and or Reclusium to accommodate the Apothecarian, the Red Scorpions instead maintain a much smaller scout company than their peers. This is not due to arrogance that they don't need the new recruits, or if it is, then they certainly don't say so, because it would make them even less likeable than their insular scorn already likely does. Rather, the Red Scorpions have an incredibly stringent recruitment procedure that organically keeps the number of neophytes down, presumably because they will only select the purest of the pure to join their ranks in the first place, and will make sure of this as they initiate the new members. In fact, their recruitment is rather unique as well, in that it takes place almost at birth instead of around the age of 10, as is typical for many Astartes. The majority of recruitment, though not strictly all of it, is done from an arid tribal world in Segmentum Sempestus known as Zabus Minoris, which could be considered the homeworld of the Red Scorpions, though in truth they just see it as a recruitment base rather than a home, and their fortress monastery is actually not based there. Instead, the chapter placed its base on the moon of Zabus Minoris, not interacting with the populace except at the recruitment stage. At the first full moon following the birth of a child, the family of any newborn males will present their just-born son at the temples to their gods. In effect, though they do not know it due to their primitive nature, they hand their sons over to the apothecaries who will thoroughly test their genetics to see if they're a suitable potential recruit in future. Should the infant pass the tests, they will be taken by the gods to the moon and live amongst the chapter for the entirety of their lives, never knowing any difference and thus I suspect not being susceptible to any taint or impurity before their eventual ascension to the ranks of the Astartes. However, it is known that the Red Scorpions can and do recruit from elsewhere and do not really treat Zabus Minoris as home, so one could just as aptly call them a crusading chapter in some ways, without being too far from the truth. Don't go spreading that little piece of information around though. Only the upper echelons of the administratum even know that Zabus Minoris is used for recruitment in such a way, besides the Scorpions themselves. So if anyone asks, just say they don't have a home base and that they're a crusading chapter if you know what's good for you. As for their organisation and command, everything is broadly as you would expect, especially when you consider their needs. The chain of command is absolute and inflexible. This is unsurprisingly not a chapter for the free thinkers of the galaxy. And yet, at the same time, every single Red Scorpion must be extremely flexible in the various roles they can be asked to undertake, and even for who they will serve alongside. Squad and company membership can be shuffled as the need arises, and no matter whether deployed in support or assault roles, every Red Scorpion is expected to be just as skilled. Either due to numbers or due to the preferences of their current commanders, more on them later, the neophytes will not be used in their typical role of flankers, snipers, or generally scouts, instead serving side by side on the front line with the full battle brothers. Nothing says trial by fire like that, besides maybe the mentorship system of the Black Templars. Finally, there is their armory and vehicle pool, both of which aren't exactly unique, but are both pretty impressive. The pair are both well stocked, with no particular resource lacking, though drop pods and land raiders are particularly common it seems. They do possess some special weapons, however, a set of relic blades known as the Tears of the Scorpion. Usually reserved for captains, known as commanders, as well as the Lord High Commander, and especially renowned heroes in some cases, the Tears are of a design long lost and hold incredible value to the chapter. Their origin is lost along with their design, but I suspect it could be tied to the forgotten history of the Red Scorpion's founding, given their value. It's also worth noting that the forges of the Red Scorpions are capable of producing a small amount of the Mark IV power armor, which is usually awarded to veterans along with extremely well-crafted weapons as a sign of their elevated rank. Quite how they do this I'm unsure, since Mark VII was in circulation by their time of their founding more than likely, but I suspect if they haven't lost the STC in the past however many millennia, and they somehow got their hands on it, and whatever, then it isn't that impossible, I suppose. It's just something you don't see very often. The Red Scorpions have seen combat many times, though despite their history being known to date back over 5 millennia, the entirety of their known battles are much more recent. The oldest we have records of actually only happened as recently as M38, shockingly enough, and we actually made reference to it earlier on. The forward world of Helios had suffered a massive orc invasion that was successful enough to the Imperials to be forced to place the Greenskins under siege. Unfortunately, the orcs were smart about this, using bomb squigs to destroy any vehicle that tried to advance. However, the Red Scorpions weren't going to be asking for help from the Astra Militarum due to that aforementioned distrust they have for outsiders, and so the Master of the Forge was tasked with creating a solution. Said solution was, in short, attaching whirlwind missile launchers to land raiders, which combined with the actual whirlwinds succeeded in causing a breach and seeing off the orcs. The Land Raider Helios, as it is known, has since been put into service with other chapters and was even approved recently by the Adeptus Mechanicus, despite likely not having an STC lying around for it. After defeating a force of the Dark Mechanicum in the Second Aegis-Sign Crusade to many plaudits from the Mechanicus, the Scorpions then disappeared for a full 300 years in the wilderness space of Segmentum Tempestus, prompting some to believe that it had been destroyed. However, that was not the case, and though we do not know exactly what happened after their return, they didn't seem to have changed much by the time they next had a major role to play in a known conflict. This was the infamous Siege of Rax, a 17-year conflict that escalated from insurgency and rebellion to all-out chaos incursion, requiring the intervention of none other than the Grey Knights by the end. The Red Scorpions were the second Astartes element called into the war after the Dark Angels, entering with elements from 4 companies to take and exploit a breach made earlier by the efforts of the Death Corps of Krieg. They succeeded in this, actually opening the path to the central citadel of Rax for the Imperials, despite dealing with corrupted Ogryns and major chaos counterattacks. But they then withdrew once they had their beachhead, having fulfilled the part of the deal they had made with the overall campaign commander. They did then return at the climax, launching an armoured assault to again exploit the gains of their allies. This time, however, they found themselves assaulted by newly summoned demons of Khorne after their initial successes. They didn't budge, and through their efforts one of the main gates to the citadel was taken, whilst the Grey Knights focused on another. They remained even as the main Chaos leaders withdrew, helping the Order of Malleus and their chamber militants as they finally swept the citadel clean. Whether they were mind-wiped afterward is unknown, but I suspect they will have been, given they shared a theatre of war with none other than both Angrath and Urarka Asbaramael. They are some pretty big names. Following this, the Red Scorpions ran slightly afoul of the Inquisition, more on that later, before being deployed into the Badab War around halfway through the conflict, about the same time as the Minotaurs in fact. Though they were latecomers, the Scorpions were given overall command of the war from the Imperial perspective, though in truth their warriors generally were not involved in ground fighting much, as they were keeping their distance from their less pure cousins. Though their chapter master would actually be slain relatively soon after their arrival, though sources remain conflicted as to the culprit because of the nature of the incident, the Red Scorpions proved themselves incredibly useful through the course of the war. Most notably, they were tasked alongside Nova Marines, Marines Errant and Minotaurs with taking the industrial planet of Viania. Despite an incredibly positive casualty ratio, the Loyalists were initially somehow repulsed by the secessionist forces, only able to take Viania after probably at least a year of fighting. The Scorpions also, along with primarily the Fire Angels along with Salamanders, Nova Marines and Raptors, took another key world from Huron's forces despite the use of viral weapons and the like. The loss of Sagan was especially painful for the secessionists as it effectively split the main rebels, the Astral Claws and Mantis warriors, and left them unable to support one another. At or around the same time, the Scorpions fleet was conducting several raids and boarding actions against the Executioners. Whilst not as effective as the similar actions performed by the Minotaurs against the Lamenters, who of course eventually surrendered, they will have made their mark, I do not doubt. The last major engagement the chapter is known to have fought in as part of the Badab War is known as the Angstrom Incident. The Angstrom system contained a forge world that had struck a deal with Huron and the Secessionists, effectively making the Mechanicus of that world as much a traitor as the Tyrant of Badab himself. Though the Adeptus Mechanicus itself did not seemingly respond to this, the Space Marines did. Red Scorpions and Salamanders ambushed one of the handovers, not only destroying the cash being handed over, but even managing to prevent further deals in future. Not quite sure how, but they did. That's the main thing. Maybe they just occupied the world or killed the leading tech priest, I'm not sure. It is not believed, despite still being in overall command of the war, that a single Red Scorpion was involved in the fall of Badab itself, though their replacement chapter master did still have oversight of the battle, as he was the one to task the Karkaridan Astra with the infrastructure damage that ultimately nearly destroyed the entire planet. In the aftermath, it appears that the Red Scorpions were given a fair share of salvage rights that will have helped to reinforce the 8 companies and the fleet committed. But since the Badab War, the records of the Battle of the Chapter have become fragmented and almost unknown in fact. We know that the single company joined the Third War of Armageddon before the coming of the Cicatrix Maledictum, potentially on the heels of an orc warlord known as Urgok the Unstoppable, who had been a growing threat on the Eastern Fringe, or more generally in Ultima Segmentum. It is also said they were involved in operations against High Fleet Kraken, though I could find no conclusive records for battles that they fought in against the Tyranids. They have also been involved in the Indomitus Crusade, but that ties more into the personalities of the chapter and their current situation, so I'll get to that, well, right about now in fact. The leadership situation for the Red Scorpions is a rather interesting one. As though they do have an official chapter master, that individual isn't exactly in de facto command. Officially, the chapter master of the Red Scorpions is Karab Kuln, inducted from Zabus Minoris like I suspect many of the Red Scorpions are. His rise through the ranks of the chapter from Scout to Lord High Commander was relatively swift. We do not know when he was inducted, but he went from Sergeant at Vrax to Chapter Master by Fall of Badab, so that's relatively fast, I suppose. We don't have a full list of his postings, but he was already in the first company of veterans during the Siege of Vrax, serving as a Vanguard Sergeant and bearing a teleport homer to the first breach exploited and held by the Scorpions. He was also part of the force that helped to take Vrax's fortress at the end, but within 20 years he had received a promotion to First Company Captain after the previous one was slain aboard a Space Hulk. We know this as he held the rank of Commander, which as I said earlier is the term for a captain, when the Red Scorpions were called in to assist the Elysians, Cadians and Inquisition with the investigation of Beta and Felian 4. I've discussed this incident before, but suffice it to say it ended badly, as the Imperials were overrun and annihilated to a man by the Tyranids that had overrun the moon. Well, when I say to a man, I'm not including the Red Scorpions. But you see, Kuln ordered those accompanying him to evacuate, effectively leaving the Astra Militarum and the Inquisitor leading them high, dry, and extremely dead. This act, perhaps unsurprisingly, drew the attention and investigation of the Ordo Hereticus, and though it didn't seem to go past surveillance, it could have been more in another case. After all, I suspect chapters have been excommunicated for less than abandoning an Inquisitor to die. Kuln's ascension to Chapter Master came in the early stages of the Red Scorpions' involvement in the Badab War, when the previous one was slain in an incident known as the Betrayal at Grief. Out of nowhere, Lothurin called for a parley with Verant Ortis, the chapter master of the Scorpions at the time. Ortis accepted, and a meeting was set up in the Grief system in the orbit of the gas giant Shedim. Though details are unclear, it seems as though said parley wasn't going particularly well, with the secessionists in particular hurling a fair amount of rage and vitriol. However, the words did not descend to violence as both sides took a break to cool off, but at this time things went, well, wrong. 3 vessels of origin unknown appeared from a concealed position as connections to the Loyalist fleet were cut, and a vicious 3-way battle erupted both in space and on the station itself between Red Scorpions, Astral Claws, and a force of mutants and heretics. Yes, 3-way battle. It is unclear whether these forces were actually allied to Huron and thus it was a front, or whether they were a traitorous or chaotic third party simply attempting to avoid a peaceful resolution to the war. Regardless of the exact circumstances, Ortis was slain in the ensuing mayhem, and following the incident, Kuln was elevated to Chapter Master of the Red Scorpions. His actions as overall commander of the Badab War are less known, but he is known to have been involved personally in the Angstrom incident, as well as of course having oversight of the fall of Badab. More recently, Kuln was involved in the Indomitus Crusade in some way or another, though it is unknown whether he did actually meet Guilliman personally. Would have been a bit of an amazing moment for him if he had. If he did, I expect he might have even received a passing word from the Primarch about his disrespect for the 10th Company, as he sees camouflage and stealth in general as cowardice, which is probably not all that helpful. However, Kuln would not strictly survive the Indomitus Crusade, as he fell during a battle believed to have taken place on a dark Mechanicum forge world known as Sarum, near to the Maelstrom. Though it could have been against Tyranids instead, things seem a little bit unclear on that. Whether it was here or not, or against whoever it was, the end result was the same. Kuln was interred into a dreadnought sarcophagus in order to sustain his life. And not just any dreadnought either, but a Leviathan dreadnought, incredibly rare relics of the Legiones Astartes actually built without the knowledge of the Mechanicum back in the day. However, either due to traditions of the Red Scorpions or some other technological limitation likely involving stasis, Colin is not in command of the Red Scorpions from day to day, though he is still officially the chapter master. Instead, command has been passed on and is currently shared by Captain Cassin Sabius and ancient vigilant and chapter standard bearer Sire Caragon. Sabius is a renowned warrior and strategist, as well as a fanatical believer in the genetic purity within the chapter. He was voted as the successor to the fallen Kulm by the rest of the chapter, but though he went along with his brother's decision, he does not feel he is a worthy leader. Until a new Lord High Commander is officially selected, Sabius is their de facto leader known as Lord Regent, but he does not entirely do it alone thanks to the presence of Sire Caragon. Caragon was elevated from a regular standard bearer to the bearer of the Vexilia Imperialis, a standard awarded to the Scorpions after the Badab War by the High Lords of Terror that is now one of their most prized possessions. He earned this after slaying none other than a Gene-Stealer Patriarch on the hive world Lamano 7. No small accomplishment, it really must be said. Following Kulm's fall, Caragon was promoted again to the rank of Ancient Invigilus, a guardian of purity even though he's not a chaplain, as well as being capable of scrutinizing Lord Regent Sabius. In truth, this is a mutually beneficial situation as the two have very contrasting personalities, pragmatism for Caragon, zeal for Sabius. One suspects that if push came to shove, Sabius would be considered the overall commander of the Scorpions, aside from of course Kulm, but the two were considered as joint de facto chapter masters in pretty much every sense. Another high-ranking member of the chapter is their chief librarian, an extremely powerful psyker called Severin Loth. Being recruited away from Zabus Minoris and instead from a region known as the Orden Rift, his psychic power has always been rather impressive, even in those early days as a neophyte. Unfortunately, this power came with a healthy dose of bloodlust and rage, but once he'd learned to reel it in a bit, it only made Loth more dangerous since he was a prodigious warrior and psyker both. He's also been around for quite a long time, having served for several centuries even before the Badab War. Unfortunately, we don't know when exactly he was recruited, nor when he became chief librarian. He was present in the betrayal at Grief, and though he was unable to prevent the death of Lord High Commander Ortis, he was able to recover his body before taking up a role as the most trusted advisor and even a commander under Carab Kulm. It assumes that he still plays a very similar role under the leadership of Sabius and Caragon, though given his legend and reputation, part of me wonders why he wasn't a candidate for Chapter Master himself. Probably because he was a psyker actually, not everyone's the Blood Ravens, I suppose. Finally, today, we have Gregor Tham, officially a Master Apothecary of the chapter, and thus probably someone very high up. We know very little of his time in the Red Scorpions, however, as he is best known for his service as part of the Death Watch, which he was basically invited to join after his work in the purging of Castilium. Said work involved toxins and bioengineering, and following his assignment to watch Fortress Eriok, he was tasked with nothing short of developing a bioweapon or a toxin to beat the Tyranids. Though he would work as a sergeant for kill teams, being especially useful for inexperienced ones, this task has been his primary focus and he's actually seen success in it. Unfortunately, though his toxins have crippled and allowed for many victories, they only work once, and the hive mind adapts before it can work again. This has encouraged Than to push further east toward where the heart of the Tyranids are believed to be. He has a theory that they're less evolved over there, and so he can perhaps find the basic genetic coding of the Tyranids that he can exploit. Will it work? Who knows, but if it makes any strides towards the elimination of the Tyranids from the galaxy, then, simply put, I am very much all for it. So end the tales of the Red Scorpions. Though in truth I'm not massively fond of their ideology, I cannot deny that the Red Scorpions are a powerful foe both as warrior and commander. And if I'm being totally truthful, their xenophobic and distrustful mindset is probably less of a parody on that of the Imperium than many would like to admit, or maybe they would like to admit it, I don't know, it's the Imperium. Either way, I wouldn't want to run across them for any reason, especially not their now dreadnought-entombed leader or his zealous regent. Now, as ever, onward we must go. Since we've looked at the rather judgmental group of Astartes today, why don't we take it one step further and look at the true judges of the Imperia? May not be the longest stop, but it might be an intriguing bit of history as well as a look into life inside humanity's empire. For now though, thank you for watching Tactica Imperialis, and I'll see you all again. Goodbye.